On today's video, we are going to go through some TP-Link Omada setup, as well as setting up pihole on some new equipment that we got. So in our house, we were dealing with some aging equipment and some old 1 gig switches and whatnot. So I kind of bit the bullet and going full on board here with the TP-Link Omada. So some of the old stuff that we had, you know, this Asus AC 1900. I don't know if you guys remember these bad boys. This is the one that you could flash with the 68U firmware, and had a couple of these for the last, I don't know, 7-8 years, and they work fine. You know, it was good for its time. You know, it was fine. But now we're going to go through setting up the TP-Link Omada software controller so that we don't have to buy this extra $100 OC200 module. So for the TP-Link infrastructure, you need essentially 3 things, potentially 4. So one of which is this hardware controller. So you've got your hardware controller, then you've got your router, and then you've got your access points. So those are the 3 that are required. The 4th would be a smart switch. Those are all still really expensive. So kind of, I'll show you how we worked around it in our house, or how I worked around it in our house. And I think that's the way that a lot of you will go, just because some of those switches are like $400 or $500, especially when you get into the 2.5 gig, which I chose to go with. So start off with the hardware. So I went with the ER707M2, which is a 2.5 gig. It's got 2 2.5 gig ports, and then it's got 4 1 gig ports, and then the fiber optic if you need a 5th. It's also got a USB if you wanted to do a USB cell fallover as a WAN port. You could do that as well. And I do have to say that TP-Link's web pages, they got these super sexy pictures. You know, the router actually comes in this just brown box, but they make it look so sexy on their webpage. And it is a nice looking unit in person. Feels really high quality. So that is our router. So that's step 1. The next thing, I got 2 different access points. So I got, this is their EAP 650 outdoor. This is supposed to be a long range, very directional dual band access point. So you know, whereas the Asus was a 4-port router and wireless all built in one, this TP-Link setup is slightly different. Everything is separate. So we've got our router box first, then we've got our wireless access points to actually distribute the wireless signal. So this one's going to go outside. So we've got a really long backyard. It's about 500 feet long. So this thing claims that it'll do 5 gigahertz up to 300 meters. So that should give us pretty decent coverage all the way in the backyard. Then for in the house, we've got this EAP 670. So this is going to be our main puck, and it must be hard to make a pie plate look sexy, because this is the only one that doesn't have the sexy photos when you scroll through here. It's just a bunch of information on how it works. But this is supposed to be really, really fast. It's got crazy throughput on that 5 gigahertz band. So it should be enough to handle all of the devices in our house. So where does Truenas fit into all of this? So when we talked about this OC200 controller, there is actually an application to mimic this hardware controller through software. So the first bit is going to be installing that. And this guy goes for around $100. So by doing this in Truenas, you can save yourselves $100 by not having a hardware controller. So if we go into Truenas, go into our apps, you can see I've already got it installed here, and I installed the TrueCharts version of this. So again, you'll go into Discover Apps, and you'll just type in Omada. You know, here we've got the Truenas version, here we've got the TrueCharts version. I installed the TrueCharts version. It's up to you, whichever you like better. So I will show you my settings here. But you essentially do not have to change anything. It will run through and it'll make you put in a username and password. And it will show you your main port for the graphic user interface is 8043. And then the only other thing that you've got to take notice of are all of these ports. So write this down. Write down port 29810 and 29814. You're going to have to forward all of those to get everything to talk to each other. So literally don't change a thing. Just click I've checked the documentation and hit install. I'm not going to update because mine is up and working great. And once that's installed, you can launch it and you'll be greeted with a screen that looks like this. Welcome to use Omada controller. Let's agree to some cookies down here and then let's get started. So username, you're going to type in whatever. An email. A password, and then we are not going to link the cloud access. It might actually make things easier if you do this, but whatever. Agree to the terms and service, hit next, configure a new setup. Set your time zone. And then we're going to call this the home lab or whatever you want to call it. Set your time zone again. And device account. And I think this is what got me some snags earlier. I don't know. I'm going to do the same thing. And then I'm going to select home and hit next. And boom, there we are with the empty device configuration thing. So everybody else on YouTube, everything just automatically populates here. Doesn't happen for me. So might happen for you. You might get lucky. Awesome. Gonna skip the Wi-Fi setup because we don't have any access points at this point yet. Verify that everything is awesome. We'll have to blur that out because for whatever reason it just puts your password in plain text. Launch it and then log in with the username that you just created. Then it'll show you kind of how to get through everything. Don't just blow through these if you've never done this before because it is kind of a weird layout. So the top right switches between your global view and your home or your home lab, whatever you just put in there. Bottom left, that cog is the settings, and then the rest kind of pop up as you do it, so it's pretty straightforward, but at least knowing to go to those couple of corners really help you out in the very beginning. So skip that. And this is what you'll see. You'll see one site with 0 gateways, 0 switches, 0 access points, 0 clients, and 0 alerts. And then you'll pull your hair out and you won't know what to do. So I don't know if you saw that. That's where we switched from the global view to our home lab. So you can either change it on the top right, or you can select it from the left here. You know, 99.9% of us are not going to have more than one location that we're monitoring. It's just going to be our home. But if you do have more, it's really flexible and you can do that, but you'll go into your home. And then this is where we will continue on. And at that point, you will get to this screen and it'll essentially say 0 gateways discovered, 0 switches discovered, and 0 access points discovered, even though you've got everything plugged in. So at that point, I wasn't sure I was doing this correctly, but you are. It's just a little bit weird until you get going. So we've got that installed and we've got 0 devices found. So what I had to do was I plugged a different PC directly into my router. So I had a little smaller PC than this one, a little bit closer to where I have everything installed. Plugged that in, got an IP address, found out, okay, cool. I was 192.168.8.2 on there. So I went to Chrome or Edge or whatever you want to use, and I logged into 192.168.8.1, and that got me to a login page like this. So with the blue-green TP-Link, and it said Omada multi-gig VPN router up on the top right here. And this was in, I guess what they're going to call standalone mode at first. So I knew that I was able to communicate with the router, which was great. Now I went down a whole rabbit hole of setting everything up, forwarding all these ports, doing everything I could, just to find out that the second that your controller finally adopts this, all of those settings go away. So I don't think it's worth doing anything in this screen except for maybe the update if you want to. There's always going to be a firmware update, but you don't even need to. I would just not mess around with this. I would go straight for one of two things. So, and I'd love to tell you which one of these worked better. I don't think one worked better than the other one. If you've got an iPhone or an Android, there's an Omada app that you can download, and it's just called Omada, and it will scan your network for new devices. The app found both of my access points, but the way that I discovered the router, first of all, was through this discovery utility, this Omada discovery utility. So I clicked search, it popped up, and then under the action button here, I could essentially adopt it and tell it the username and password that I set up when I was originally defining my home network in the Truenas app, if that makes any sense, the Truenas software controller app. So once I did that, then it showed up in here as a gateway. And once that showed up as a gateway, then the access points showed up in the app. So there's a lot of videos out there where everything just magically shows up through this software controller at first, and that was probably the most frustrating for me, was I could not get things to show up until that gateway got recognized through the Java application called Discovery Utility. So I'll put a link to the Discovery Utility down there. The iOS app you're going to have to find in the store. It's pretty easy to get to. But that's what worked for me. I wish I had taken some screenshots, but again, I did all this on a different computer, so it's kind of hard to to visually show here. Okay, so after our network discovery tool found the ER707, you can come back into the Truenas software controller, and you should see it come up. If you click on the Devices tab on the left-hand side, and then it's under Gateway and Switches, or if you're on All, it'll show you everything, but at this point you'll probably only have the gateway. So then you've got to click Adopt, and what that will do is that will bind the router, or essentially tell the router that this software is now controlling it, and then that will change your login page to look like this. It'll say permission denied, Omada controller software is running, web servers forbidden. So that old 192.168.8.1 or whatever IP address this thing from the factory was sending you to will now say permission denied, because it is no longer in standalone mode now. Now it knows that it's being managed by the software controller. At this point, you've got to go in and we've got to do some port forwarding. So remember those ports I told you guys to write down, that 29810 to 29816. I think I said 14 earlier, but it's actually 29816. So in order to do that, you've got to go to Settings down here on the bottom left. And then everybody else in the world calls it port forwarding. TP-Link Omada does not. So this took another little bit to figure out. You've got to go to Transmission, and then NAT. So once you are in NAT, you are going to set up so that it looks like this. So I named mine controller. You can name it whatever. So you'll click Create New Rule, and it'll pop up. Give it a name, and you just tell it the source ports. So that 29810 to 29816. And then I told it the destination PC of your Truenas box. So mine's at .29.30 right now. Destination port, same thing, 29810 to 29816, all protocols. And then you'll hit apply or save or whatever. At that point, you should be able to communicate with the wireless access points. So that's when you pull up your app, see if they show up in that app, adopt them in the application, send them your login, username and password that you set up, and at that point they should show up in your dashboard as access points. So once you get there, you'll see your access points, and again there will be under the action button here on the right, it'll say adopt, and then these will most likely eventually poll and find out that they've got a new firmware version, so there'll be a little up arrow here. You can click that and you can automatically update the firmware on those as well. So I can see that both of mine are showing up and connected. And that is the easy part. So this part was probably the most frustrating for me. It took me probably 2 hours just to get this darn software controller to recognize those 3 pieces of equipment for me. Once that was done, which every other video on YouTube makes it look like that takes 8 seconds, this probably took me 3 hours of pulling my hair out to get it figured out. And I wish I'd have written down the exact steps along the way so that I could give you more concise instructions. But now that everything's discovered on my network, I really don't want to mess with it. Do I think this might be a smidge easier with a hardware controller? Probably. It probably just automatically recognizes. But where's the fun in that? Plus, you know, just 3 hours just saved myself $100 for that hardware controller. So tomatoes, tomato, whatever. We'll go through now what I did to set up the actual Omada software for our network. So the first thing you've got to do is go into your LAN settings. So you'll go settings, wired networks, and then LAN. So here you can see I've got 4 of these bad boys set up. I've got one for Internet of Things, my regular generic LAN for everything. You can call this admin LAN, whatever you want to call it. And then I've got 2 separate Wi-Fi networks for the kids. I've got an older kid and a couple of younger kids, and I want them to have different rules, different schedules of when they're allowed to be on the internet, and different filtering for that as well. So these are called your subnets. So you can see I've got my main subnet is 29. Then I've got 30 for the older kid, 31 for the younger kids, and then 32 is a subnet that I've developed for all of the quote-unquote smart electronics in the house. So the Amazon Echoes, the doorbells, the smart light switches, whatever you've got in there that is Internet of Things, has its own vLAN setup. So I'm going to show you the main one first. So I'm going to click Edit. Assign it to all the LAN interfaces. So this is just the ports that are available on the front here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we've got all of those ports on our actual router. So that's just these. All right, if that makes any sense. So if you don't want this to be available on any one of these, if you just want it available on a specific one, you can just select that port. That's fine. The gateway subnet, again, I was assigning this one 29, just because that's what I had my Truenas box set up as before, and I wanted to keep that. So, because it was kind of burned into my brain that was the 29 subnet. So put a 24, which opens it up for everything. And then you can hit update DHCP range and it'll fill this in automatically for you. I set mine just to start at 31, just so I have some reserved ranges. So it'll start assigning new IP addresses at 31 all the way up to 254. Now for the DNS server, leave this at auto to start. We'll come back to this after we set up pihole. So disregard this where it looks like it's going back to my Truenas box right now, because it is, because I'm running pihole. So we'll touch on that in a little bit. So for the kids accounts, I decided to go a similar approach. So we'll do the older son's now. So he's at a subnet of 30. So I am assigning a VLAN of 30, and then I'm making his subnet 30 in this field right here. Hit the update DHCP range. I didn't do any reservations here, so that's going to start at 2 and go up to 254. Now for the DNS server, I did manual, and I did 1113, which is Cloudflare's anti-malware and anti-porn or adult content DNS. So I didn't want the kids, you know, my son's 13 years old. These years are coming. I didn't want him stumbling down any of those rabbit holes on our Wi-Fi. And then the backup is 1003. So I did this for both of the kids' accounts, just to make sure any of that gets blocked from that level. And that's really the only difference between all of these accounts. So these two have that anti-adult content filter on them. And the only thing that you've got to do differently for each one is just make sure that you set the VLAN number 31 here that corresponds to the subnet. So these gateways will all start at 1, and that's just the gateway or the virtual router for this gateway will always be, just always set that to 1 and 24. And then when you update the DHCP range, it'll start at 2, meaning that any device that connects to this particular virtual LAN will start at 2 and go up to 254. So here you can see I did the same thing, 1113, 1003. And then save it. So that is our quote-unquote LANs. So now once we've got our LANs set up, now we can go to our wireless. So we can set up our wireless LANs with a whole bunch of different SSIDs. So, you know, VLANs are great when you are plugging into a hard-piped Ethernet switch, but when you are doing everything wirelessly, you need matching wireless LANs with SSIDs set up. So here you can see I called mine IP in the yard is my main LAN. So if we go into edit here, you can name the SSID, tell it the security that you want, and put a password key here, and just hit save. And that's all you need to do for your main LAN. Now for the kids, so for my older boy, I've got his set up. There's a couple of more things you got to do. So named his, gave him his own password. I enabled him as a guest network, just so that there couldn't be any talkback or any, he couldn't, if he wants to try to get tricky and control this web portal or anything, it wouldn't let him have access to that. Advanced settings, you're going to click the drop down, and you're going to, on this VLAN field, I assigned him the VLAN 30 just moments ago. So we have to click enable and make sure that he is on VLAN 30. Beyond that, I went and I did a schedule. So he will have access to Wi-Fi from 6:30 in the morning until 9 at night on school nights, and then 11:30 on Friday and Saturday nights, to give him a little bit more flexibility, but also making sure he's got a decent bedtime. Otherwise, you know, he'll be up there playing Call of Duty or whatever until 2 in the morning. And right now, he's a growing kid. We want to kind of enforce those hard boundaries, so that's where we're going currently. So if you want to do that, here I've got the 2 different ones that I've already set up, or your first time you'll have to click create new time range entry, or after the fact you can manage the time entries, and then go in here, click edit, and it's just a bunch of sliders. You can go back and do your own thing. So once that's set up, you'll hit apply. That'll bring you back to this screen. Just make sure everything looks good. So for this one, the older boy's set up with his own personal SSID. See that we've got both 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz selected here. The guest network is checked, and the proper VLAN is assigned of 30 over here. Then we do the same thing with the little kids. So the 2 smaller kids, they've got their own separate password. Go into advanced settings, make that VLAN match the one that I've got set up, and give them their schedule. So theirs is strikingly similar, 6:30 a.m. to 9 during school nights, and then they've got until 10 on Friday, Saturday nights. So not quite as flexible with them, but again, they'll just be up there on their iPads doing whatever, if we don't have a hard cutoff for them. Then Internet of Things, I did the same thing, but with a VLAN of 32. And I don't have that on a guest network, just because these are things where I'm physically typing in the password, and I'm not really worried about the guest network limitations there. I'm not really certain if it does anything good, bad, or ugly, but whatever. So there we can see I've got our 4 wireless SSIDs all set up then. You know, you can add one for wireless cameras if you've got anything like that. you can do whatever. I believe it says you can have up to 9 SSIDs on the equipment that I have purchased broadcast at the same time. So now if we go back to devices and we click on our router, it'll going to pop up from the side here and it'll display all of our ports. Now, one of these was showing up weird at first. It was showing up as a WAN port when it was really just my connection back to my Truenas box. But you can physically click on any of these ports and set them for whatever. So, which is really convenient and flexible. So this 2.5 gig port WAN 1, you can go in and you can change everything. It's really neat how they have it set up. You can tell it, all right, so this port I want to be on either the main network or that virtual network 30. Probably can't see because my face is in the way. 31 or 32 that we've got set up here. So you can force it to be on a particular vLAN if you want. So where this is going to come in handy is I don't have smart switches. So I've only got quote unquote dumb switches. But now I can say, okay, this switch that is on this port 3, I want this to be on a particular network. I want this to be on the Internet of Things vLAN only. So you can kind of limit your access controls through that, which is pretty nice. So I can take a switch that I bought on Amazon. So I got this one. It was 85 bucks, and this is my 2.5 gig switch. So this has a switching capacity of 60 gigs, which is crazy. I'm never going to use that kind of bandwidth for now. And it's great because this is a PoE switch, so I can use this to power both of the access points. And you can plug non-PoE things in there as well. So my Truenas box has 2 NICs on the back of it. I could theoretically plug both of those in, you know, to port 1 and port 2 on this, and then port 3 and 4 could be my 2 access points. And then I've got 4 additional points at that full 2.5 gig speed. So I've got this dumb switch plugged into the router. So that is, let me get the visual here. That is this port 2, 2.5 gigabits per second. So port 1 is the fiber internet coming in. Port 2 is that 2.5 gig switch. Port 3 is a dumb switch. So I've got this bad boy right here from my old network. So I've got this plumbed into my office. So I've got access to plug in my work computer, my personal computer, my wife's work computer, my wife's personal computer. Our printer is out here. And actually, just for testing, I moved the one access point out here with the PoE power injector just to see if that would work. And that's a fun little experiment, and that's going well so far too. So, and I mean, this was, I think I paid 80 bucks for this 10 years ago, 9 years ago. Last purchase 2015. So, you know, you don't need anything that fancy. You can plug in these dumb switches and get similar functionality and control through your access controls there. So that is another little neat bit about this whole smart setup. Now, one of the first things you want to do once you get this Truenas box talking to your controller, or your controller in your Truenas box talking to your router, is you need to set a static IP for that. So there's two ways to go through that. The first is if we go settings, then services, and then DHCP reservation will be the first one here. And you'll define the IP address of your Truenas box. So you'll just click create new DHCP reservation entry down there. And you can hand type in your MAC address and put the IP address. I think the easier way to do this is to go on the far left hand side. If you go to clients, find your Truenas piece of equipment, click it, this side menu will pop up, and if you go to config and then used fixed IP address, you just click enable and then give it your fixed IP address. So that's probably easier because you don't have to worry about typing in your MAC address or any of that. But once that's in there, then it guarantees that if you've got power outage or a reboot or whatever, it's always going to issue that same IP address to your Truenas box, so you don't set all this up and then end up losing it in a little bit. Now, tying all this back to Pi-hole, and if you've never seen Pi-hole before, it is this lovely dashboard that blocks a whole bunch of ads, and it just makes the web viewing experience so much better. So if you just go to a garbage website like weather.com, okay, this thing normally has ads like crazy all over the top, all over the sidebars, and it's nuts. You can do the same thing with Yahoo, if anybody still goes to this. So Edge does a great job at removing the kind of blank space from some of these ads that are getting Pi-holed. But here's the same thing in Chrome. You can see it just kind of leaves that blank box there, and you can see just how many advertisements are really getting identified and taken away out of web pages that you view. So it's just really neat to kind of eliminate some of that tracking and some of those ads that are just constantly blasted at us. So again, here's that same thing, just kind of Edge does a really decent job at cleaning that up. So if you want to get your Pi-hole service running and see that 12.5% of the things that were displayed over the last 2 or 3 days have been garbage ads from places, here's how to set that up. So go back to apps, discover apps, search for Pi-hole. I did the True Charts. So it's literally a 0 config. All you have to do is you enter in a login password. I'd go into edit here and show you the actual screens, but then it's going to show you my password. So I'm not going to do that. So literally just run it, install it, then hit the admin panel. It will bring you to this. You'll be forced to log in with that password that you just defined, and that's it. So it'll say total queries 0, things blocked 0, percentage blocked 0. One of the first things that you want to do is go to Tools, Update Gravity. So the gravity is the blocked domains. So you click update, boom, success. Now it'll say how many domains are on that add list for proper blocking. Now, the only other thing you've got to do to get the traffic to be physically directed to this is go to settings and then DNS, or domain name servers. So when you click DNS, there's going to be whatever the generic was installed here is going to be checked on the left. So you'll uncheck all that stuff. You will select upstream DNS servers. And then all you're going to do is you're going to list the IP address that your router is at. So if you remember from the very beginning of this, my TP-Link router is at 192.168.29.1. So the upstream requests, everything that is being funneled into my router is essentially coming from that IP address. So we reference back to that as the upstream DNS server. And that allows this to intercept everything funneling through the router, if that makes any sense. So we are almost there. So now that you've got that defined, you'll hit save down on the bottom right here. You can't see because my face is in the way, but you'll hit that blue save box. And then you've got to go back to Omada, and we will go settings, wired networks, LAN. And once you're in LAN, we'll select our main vLAN. So whatever we want to be going through this pihole, we'll hit edit. And then the DNS server, instead of auto or whatever else you had it set at, this is where we'll define it manually as the IP address of the Truenas box running pihole. So again, we've already set that to be a reserved IP. In this case, mine's 29.30. So you're just referencing back to that point. So the IP address of your Truenas box, where all of your services are running. So again, mine is 29.30 as your DNS server. Then you'll hit save, and now you'll immediately start seeing requests come through here. You'll see total queries just start to jump through the roof, and you get all of these great graphics as to what the top domains are. So it looks like iCloud is being pinged a lot. Whatever this software development kit for Braze.com is, who the heck knows. Google Analytics like crazy. Beacons. Amazon metrics. You know, the kind of thing where when you start one Google search and suddenly you've got ads for it across your Facebook, across your Instagram, across Amazon, everywhere. So that stuff should stop happening once you get this Pi-hole instance up and running and talking to itself. So we set up our TP-Link Omada software controller, scrambled around a little bit to get that router to talk to it, got our access points added. We talked a little bit about dumb switches and why I really don't think 99% of us will need to pay the premium for a smart switch. I think it's perfectly manageable through dumb switches. We didn't really go into ACLs at all, so let's go into network security and access controls. So if we had a smart switch, you could go into your switch ACLs and you could define access control limits for that. But you can do the same thing on your gateway. You know, we just don't have as many ports. So here I've got one. You just go create new rule. I'm going to go into edit. and you name it something. So I'm naming this Internet of Things deny VLAN. So I'm going to deny the other virtual LANs. The direction is LAN to LAN, and I'm going to deny from Internet of Things to anywhere else. So that Internet of Things is completely isolated by itself. If you had a camera VLAN, you could do the same thing. So just the cameras are able to talk to themselves, but the cameras aren't able to then go out to the internet. So there you would do LAN to WAN instead of LAN to LAN. The other one I have is to deny the gateway management page or this portal. So I have that set up LAN to LAN, and I have all of the other LANs and VLANs, so the little kids and the Internet of Things, I have it blocking the gateway management portal. Fire truck going by. So now that that's out of the way, again, 99% of us, just these couple of rules that you can put in for the gateway access controls or those ports on the front of your gateway are going to be more than enough. If you need more flexibility than that, then you will need to do the smart switch. If you need to break it down to a crazy network where you've got a lot of devices, maybe. But for me, again, those 6 or 7 ports on the front of this router are more than enough to define what I need to do. So we've done that. We set up our LANs, we set up our VLANs, we did the adult content filtering for the kids. We did the access controls here so that nobody can get on any of the networks and get to this gateway management portal except for the adults in the house. We reserved a custom or a static IP for our Truenas instance so that we can always establish communication back and forth. We did the pihole server so that our web interface, our web surfing is not just inundated with these ads constantly. And most importantly, we have everything all tied in to this beautiful Omada dashboard where we can see all of our clients, all of our access points, our gateway, and you can revoke, you can turn things off. You can say, all right, well, hey, Peyton's been a bad boy this week. I'm going to disconnect his PS4. And you can do it in one click. It's no longer a hassle. And every night at 9 o'clock or whenever I've got these things set to, I don't have to worry about the kids staying up in bed watching videos on their tablets until 2 in the morning. It's just, I know it's off. I know it's bedtime. And it's so much less of a worry as a parent and as a nerd going through all of this stuff. So it alleviates some of that burden on us as a family. So sorry this wasn't as straightforward as I thought it was going to be, but I do think it's a rabbit hole worth going down for anybody who's got a Truenas instance already set up. I really do like this TP-Link Omada. The software has a bit of a learning curve to it, and there was a lot of clicking around and a little bit of frustration at first. But if you get that discovery utility and the matching iOS app, it is possible. Just keep at it. And eventually you'll see that gateway pop up, and then you can define that IP, and then it'll find your access points. And from that forward, it was really not too terribly bad. I hope this wasn't too all over the place, and I hope this added some value for some of you guys. Let me know down in the comments if you need me to elaborate on anything. Like and subscribe for more. Thanks again.